strength through your loved ones and grace and carry on. Thank you for joining us for our first virtual Candlelight meeting. We're here at I can't take my eyes off of you. 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 I can't take my eyes.
I'll confess to you that I'm not hearing anything, but I'll take the camera being on me as an invitation to speak. My name's Dave Messner, and I serve as the pastor here at the Unitarian Church in Charleston. We're down on Archdale Street, and normally we would all be together for this important and solemn memorial occasion each year. It's an important gathering to us. If you don't know us, we've been here. This is our third century, the Unitarian Church, and we've been heretics for about 200 years. And the heresy of this church has less to do, if we tell the story truthfully, about heresies about God, and more to do with heresies about what it means to be human. Some of the heresies that we continue to advance is that every person counts. No one can be left out. There needs to be room at the table for absolutely everyone, and especially for those who aren't like us. It's easy to make room at the table for your family. It's harder to make room for strangers. It's especially hard in times of crisis and times of epidemic. I'm struck here on World AIDS Day, in which we memorialize those lost to an epidemic of the past, peaked in the past, amidst an epidemic of today. And one of the things I've learned as a pastor about the effect of an epidemic, aside from obvious physical ones and the physical struggle of illness, turns out, if not the least of it, just the beginning of it. Because what an epidemic can do is isolate you from your community and cause you to be left out. That's the really painful reality that so many people are experiencing today in an era of COVID. But I want to lift that up in a very different way, and what it was or must have been to have been suffering from HIV infection and AIDS, and indeed to travel the last stretch of life with AIDS in the early era, where isolation was an intentional campaign to isolate, to leave people out, to push people away, to ensure that people weren't taken care of. So that's the kind of grim side to remember today, that who gets left out, and how things like disease, which diseases have no agenda. Diseases do what diseases do. People have agendas and biases, and at times stony hearts. So while I lift up the hard part of that, I want to lift up the really good part, which is the other heresy of our entire Unitarian faith, which is that everybody not only can be invited in, but everyone has this incredible power of good hearts. And I'm really moved in my work as a pastor for the power people have to be caregivers to others. And as I've heard stories of those who survived, and many stories of people who lost partners to AIDS, the time they spent as caregivers, so people wouldn't be isolated, and the kind of courage and persistence and resilience that took. And those who live today in the shadow of a kind of long grief of those they've lost, who they cared for in physical ways, but care for today still so powerfully in ways of the heart. This is why we gather. And this is how we affirm our sense of faith in what is possible with loving hearts and caring hands, and when we come together for each other. And so that's the end of my little welcome to this place. I am sorry it is a virtual place, But let us not be daunted in coming together for each other. Let us ensure that no one is isolated, especially in times of illness and suffering. And let us recommit ourselves to love one another in this time of epidemic, and as we remember those whom we loved and whom we've lost. And so with that, let us begin this time together.
Co-chair of the South Carolina HIV Planning Council, and also on the Ending the Epidemic Steering Committee. Since being diagnosed with HIV in 2003, he has been chair of a few committees. First was Ryan White of Charleston Community Advisory Board, and later vice chair of the Positive Advocacy Committee, then chair of the Needs Assessment Committee of the HPC, as well as a member of the South HIV Task Force and speaker for Naple Pharmaceuticals. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Mr. David Payton.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you to the Charleston Area World AIDS Day Committee for inviting me to be here with you tonight. As was just mentioned, it's hard to believe that we are in a global pandemic. How it seemed to come on so quick, emergency rooms and hospital wards full of people, and there are no treatments available. So many are dying alone. And it was the same way in the 1980s when HIV and AIDS was devastating our communities, especially the gay community back then. Who would have thought that in 2020 that we would have another pandemic like this? We still have lots of work to do, and I'm glad that there are so many dedicated people working in volunteering and treatment, care and prevention in HIV. I've been reflecting back to December 1st of 1988. That was the first year of World AIDS Day, and I was a senior in high school. And I remember watching the news. They were talking about World AIDS Day and how it was being observed around the world to remember those who have died and those who still struggled to survive. Let's just take a quick moment and remember somebody that you know. I've thought about this often, and I remember thinking to myself that, HIV or AIDS would never be something that I had to worry about. I have learned never to say never, though. There's been plenty of times in my life, especially in recent years, where I had said never for things, and they have come true. So I was 32 years old when I was diagnosed with HIV, and naturally I was devastated. My whole life was in shambles. I was going through a divorce at the time, and I was dating the first man that I had ever been in a relationship with, and he had committed suicide. I went over the edge and ended up at the Institute of Psychiatry at the Medical University of South Carolina for a few days. And while they did enough to stabilize me to get me out, I began using drugs and alcohol to cope with my life, on and off for many years. I do have to thank God for my recovery that I have today. Otherwise, I would not be sitting here talking to you. When I was diagnosed with HIV, I was guided to the Ryan White program of Charleston by a man named Benji. And I had met him a few days before I was diagnosed, surprisingly. And he had given me his business card and said if I ever needed his help to give him a call. So I gave him that call. The clinic was pretty small back then. It was 1 or 2 rooms at the medical office building. And I sure am grateful for the care that they gave me. I was lined up almost immediately with my first HIV doctor. And he had the best nurse ever. Her name was Donna. May she rest in peace. She helped me a lot through those years. She would talk to me about things, and they got me a therapist, which I still see today, and a great psychiatrist. I had seen Aaron playing the guitar earlier on there. He was one of the early people in my journey with HIV to help keep me going. There was a minister named Capers and people who made marks on my life that I'm sitting here today being able to talk to you. They cared for me when I did not care for myself. They held my hand when I needed it. And they did that for everybody, as far as I know. I'm sure they did. It took about 7 years after I was diagnosed for me to recover mentally from the worst stigma one can ever endure. The stigma inflicted on oneself. I beat myself up for years, both physically from drugs and alcohol, and mentally for feeling less than because of my status. How would anyone love me? I used to think. How could I tell someone the truth? I didn't feel I could matter to someone. I suffered in silence mostly. Let's get this straight right now. We all matter. You all matter. And don't ever think that you don't. I have to thank God for all the wonderful people, past, present, and future, with the Ryan White program and beyond, for all that you do. Up to this point, the only thing that I knew about HIV was that I had it. And I took my meds most of the time. But with 7 years after my diagnosis, I began to get better mentally. I finally knew I was bipolar and was being treated for that, and with some improvement. I started going out and making some new friends, and was invited by a friend to attend the Charleston World AIDS Day Candlelight Vigil. And that was the first time I had ever attended one at this point. And this was one of the first times I saw other people like me who had HIV and were talking openly about it. This gave me hope. And again, helped break stigma barriers for me inside. To this day, I experience stigma from others, but Eleanor Roosevelt said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I believe that today. I was my own worst enemy. I was feeling so much better and wanted to be more involved. And I started to learn more about my disease. I began to participate in the community advisory board at Roper, and that gave me a lot of confidence. I met more and more friends. My psychiatrist encouraged me to go to this gay men's group that had recently formed, and I decided to take some action and go. Recently, a friend of mine died, and I was real close to her, and she would always talk to me about action, that we have to take action. We actually have to move and do something if we want something to change. So action is one of my favorite words these days. This led to some of the best times. I was going out socially, and I was doing things like potluck dinners and doing yoga with these men. It changed my life. I met my good friend Michael Luciano in this group at that time, and we became friends quickly. And I don't know exactly how long it was after we were hanging out, but he had suggested at one point that we apply to be members of the South Carolina HIV Planning Council. This was a point in my life where I realized that I can do more, and I wanted to be able to help others. Currently, I am, as was mentioned in the beginning, I'm the current community co-chair of the South Carolina HIV Planning Council. And I had also chaired the Charleston World AIDS Day Committee a few years back. I went to the lunch and learns at the clinic and learned as much as I could about HIV. The best thing, though, that ever happened to me going to lunch and learns was I met my partner, Rick. I love him very much, and God works in mysterious ways. I guess when I was ready for more, he gave me more. And I'm grateful to be in a healthy relationship today. I would never have dreamed that the day I tested positive, I would say how extraordinary life is. I will say I'm thankful I started to take some action in my life and to do better. So I am really grateful to be here with you tonight. There's a few things I wanted to talk to you about also. To switch gears a little, we've come a long way from those early days of trying to keep people alive until a treatment or a cure was available. Eventually, we had AZT, and for some it helped, many it did not. Over time, though, we began to have medications that began to work, and I sure am grateful that they came along. When I was first diagnosed, they said you could have about 20 years to live with these new medications that we have today. They still gave me an expiration date. That was not a good mental thing. And if I believed it were true, I wouldn't have much more time yet to live. But today I know better. Today we know better. We can live longer. I'm glad that the life expectancy of a diagnosed person who begins treatment is the same pretty much today without HIV if they get on treatment. And I do believe in our lifetime that we will have a cure. We can keep people alive, and we can prevent new diagnoses of HIV. There's a toolbox of things we can use for prevention. One of the first things that they wanted us to do was abstinence. This sounds good on paper, but for most of us, it would not work. The other option was to use condoms, and many did use condoms faithfully. But in the heat of the moment, and after a few cocktails, bad decisions can be made also. So we still needed something better, something else. And something came. We found out that we could have what we call PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. And this came along, and we had a way for the negative person to protect themselves by taking one pill once a day from getting HIV. This was amazing. PrEP is available to anyone. I will say, though, it's not accessible to everyone. We still have work to do for sure. If we want to end this epidemic, it will have to be accessible to everyone. Next, we had treatment as prevention, and that was a really great one for me. That by me taking my medications faithfully, taking my antiretrovirals, and having a consistently undetectable HIV viral load, that I would not be able to transmit the virus to another person sexually. That was another great stigma reducing thing for me. We have what's called U equals U, undetectable equals untransmittable. And it's just that idea that of being able to be with someone, the person that you wanted to be. I was always afraid to date someone who didn't have HIV out of fear of passing the virus on to them. And today, I don't have to have that fear. So we have these tools, and we can end this epidemic. That's one of the really cool things, that even without having a cure, that using these tools and working with people and in our agencies together, we can end the epidemic. In 2014, many of the mayors from around the world got together in Paris and convened, and they signed what was called the Paris Declaration to End AIDS. And even the mayors of both Charleston and Columbia have signed this declaration, and are working with the state. We're committing to the target of 90-90-90. 90% of the people living with HIV knowing their status, 90% of the people on antiretrovirals, and 90% of the people on treatment, virally suppressed. The idea is that we could end this epidemic, and used to seem so far-fetched, essentially since that cure seems so far off. We can end the HIV epidemic, but it will take action, like I mentioned before. It will take action not just by the federal government. It will take action by our state government, by our local governments, action from our health departments, and action from our state legislators to change laws that get in the way of ending this epidemic. And we need action from our governor, from people living with HIV, and for those who don't have HIV. It will take all of us from all communities working together in unison to end this epidemic. Excuse me. Over the last few years, I've been on the steering committee working on developing a plan for ending the epidemic, and DHAC has been holding forums around the state virtually, gathering input from communities, and hopefully soon we will have that plan ready to put into action. Again, together we can end this epidemic. That's all I have tonight. I just want to say thank you to all of you for everything that you do every day to help improve the lives of people living with HIV, the kindness, the compassion, and love that you give to us. And God bless, and good night.
Joining us for our virtual time. I appreciate you sharing your experiences with us. Next, we want to take a moment to remember Timothy Ray Brown, who passed away this year. This World AIDS Day, we would especially like to honor the memory of Timothy Ray Brown, who is considered to be the first person cured of HIV. He passed away on September 29, 2020. Brown was called the Berlin patient at the 2008 Conference on Retroviruses and Opportunistic Infections, where his cure was first announced in order to preserve his economy. He chose to come forward in 2010 and spent the next 10 years speaking publicly, recounting the ordeal of his cure, advocating for research, and and funding for the HIV cure studies, and providing hope and support for other HIV activists and the worldwide community of people living with HIV and AIDS. Rest in peace, Timothy, knowing that your work has helped move us closer to your dream of a cure for all. Thank you. Next, we will begin the lighting of candles, and will also display names and messages that have been shared before our Charleston World AIDS Day events.
When like a my when sorrow like sea billows roll, whatever my love thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. When peace like a river attending my way, where
Next, we have Michael Luciano with our closing remarks.
Okay, hopefully everyone can hear me. Thank you all for joining us tonight for our first ever virtual World AIDS Day Candlelight Vigil. And thank you for sticking with us through technical difficulties and issues. I'd like to take just a few more moments of your time to sort of try to tie this all together. The World Health Organization has declared that the themes for this year's World AIDS Day 2020 are resilience and impact. And as they usually do, they announce those themes sort of last minute. Sunday afternoon, late Sunday afternoon, was the first I'd heard of them. And that never gives us much of a chance to coordinate or direct our activities towards the themes that they've decided on. Don't know why they always do that, but they always do. Anyway, thankfully for me, both Reverend Messner and David Pable referred to those themes already. So I'm going to try and tie it all together. Resilience is a property that our community of people living with and affected by HIV and AIDS has demonstrated for 40 long and often grueling years. And now we are called upon again to demonstrate resilience in the face of another epidemic, COVID-19, obviously. We have already demonstrated that our community has that resilience. We will survive this, and we will thrive despite the great cost in human life and sorrow that we have already experienced with one epidemic. We will get through it. And one of the best ways to think of that resilience is the individual stories of people living with HIV, such as David Pabel's story, where he went from depression and personal grief to working to bring better care to all people living with HIV and better prevention services for those at risk of HIV in the state of South Carolina. That is truly resilience. And we can help to foster resilience in our communities by being mindful of the impact of these epidemics on our communities. And Reverend Messner, said it very well. We all have to be at the table. We all have to be at the table. If there is one thing that living with HIV for more than 30 years has taught me, it is that public health is exactly that, public. It involves us all. And we must be mindful of the impact that HIV and that COVID have had on our whole community. But in particular, some of the same parts of our community which were devastated and continue to be affected by HIV are also devastated by COVID-19. We must all be at the table, and we must all be at the table together. What affects my brothers and sisters in the LGBTQ plus community affects me. What affects my brothers and sisters in the Black community affects me. And Black lives must matter to all of us. What affects my brothers and sisters in the Latinx community affects me and you and everyone else. What affects people who inject drugs and struggle with drug use affects all of us. What affects people experiencing homelessness affects all of us. And both these epidemics affect all of those parts of our community in particular, but we must remember that they affect us all. So I hope that sort of brings some closure to the evening, to remember those we have already lost, to celebrate the lives of those struggling right now, and to bring our community together to end both of these epidemics. So with that, I will thank you all for attending, and I will ask everyone who can to also attend our community breakfast, or we're calling it our community brunch and learn, this Friday, December 4th at 9 a.m. Maggie hopefully can put up the links, which will allow you to join that breakfast. Hopefully they're coming on the screen any moment now. And I encourage you all to join us there, to bear in mind the resilience of this community and the impact that everything that affects one part of our community has on the rest of our community. I invite you all to sit down at the table together at our virtual brunch and learn on Friday, And I hope that tonight inspires all of you to continue to work to end the HIV epidemic throughout the year and continue to work to protect yourselves, your families, and all of our community from the epidemic of COVID-19. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
Just a few closing remarks by Shapeinitiativecharleston.
Well, thank you guys one more time for joining us for our World AIDS Day Vigil. Just to echo the sentiments of Michael, it takes all of us to make these things happen, to make change happen in this world. And it's so important that we realize to make sure that those who have made certain things possible, how we had to work together. This year was very different for so many of us. And the powerful thing was this is a virtual event, which was a surprise for many of us. But we still had to work behind the scenes to make sure everything went well. It doesn't happen by accident. We really worked really, really hard. I think this is one of the greatest opportunities that we want to make sure we share, that we see each other, we support one another, and we work really, really hard to make sure this happens. So we wanted to celebrate one of our World AIDS Day committee members, as well as Shape Tri-County members at this time, because of all of her diligent work that she has put forth. There's so many wheels turning, and a lot of times she was behind the wheel. And we want to make sure we honor her in this moment. So Miss Maggie Heatley, could you come forward, please? Of course, my mask won't go on right now. But on behalf of the World AIDS Day Committee and Shape, we are so appreciative of all the work that you came and you've done. Like, this was the first year for many of us, and you just took the ball rolling, and we just are so appreciative of it. Thank you. We honor you, and we're just going to continue to do great work together. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You didn't have to. You snuck this in on me.
Yes, we did. Thank you, everyone.